And again, welcome everyone to Election 24, a regional and national preview. I'm Steve Foulke, professor of history at Ottawa University, and I'm pleased this evening to be joined by Dave Zook, um, an instructor at the University of Marburg in Germany. Dave, I guess you want to just give maybe a kind of brief thumbnail introduction?
Okay. Steve and I know each other from back in college days, and we share similar interests, among others, interest in American politics. And we've been sharing that interest and discussing that for close to 40 years now.
Yeah, 40 years, but who's counting? And so, with that, Dave and I are also teaching partners. And so, we have been engaged in a kind of team teaching exercise for over a decade now. We use Zoom to link our classes. Dave teaching in Germany, me, of course, teaching in Kansas. And the next of our team teaching situations is coming up in fall too, when we're going to have a course dealing with the 1960s in America. And if you have any interest in that course, feel free to contact me offline. I'd be happy to visit with you. That course is slated for Tuesdays and Thursdays early, I think in Kansas, at 9 o'clock in Kansas, which would be in the mid-afternoon in Germany. So there's a shameless plug. So it is, of course, 6 o'clock in Arizona. It's 8 o'clock in the evening in Kansas, in Wisconsin. It's, I'm fairly certain it's 3 in the morning where Dave is at in Germany. And it's 4 in the morning in Moscow, just hedging our bets. And so let's talk a little bit about the election here, where we are, where we're maybe headed. We're going to think about the presidential election. We're going to think about what's happening in the U.S. House as well as the U.S. Senate, and we're going to encourage you to put your questions in the chat, and we'll get to those questions really throughout our time together. And again, as always, a special thanks to Laura Boyd for helping put all this together. And so here we are. It's October. It's October of 2024. And the two candidates are Donald Trump and one Kamala Harris. And so, Dave, I'd just be interested in your take just to get us started here. Donald Trump is an unusual figure in American politics for a number of reasons.
Thank God.
Yeah, maybe so. But what is it? How do we explain the fact that Donald Trump is running for president in 2024? An unusual circumstance, really only seen one other time in American history. Grover Cleveland at the end of the 19th century won a term, lost, and then ran again and won a term. What's our thought about Trump in 2024?
Well, I think a lot of it is just a very normal phenomenon among presidents and ex-presidents. You get a taste of that power,
yeah,
and you just want to kind of hold on to it or get it back or whatever. And frankly, we saw the same thing with Joe Biden, a man who should have known that he really is not prepared to take on another 4 years as president, but who wanted to go at it anyway. Trump loves the power. He loves the notoriety that goes with it, and I think that explains most of why we're seeing him here again.
I think that's I think that's fair. I think I'd largely concur with all of that. And again, 90 days ago, we thought this race was very different when Joe Biden was the presumptive Democratic candidate. But that, of course, is not what happened. And so we'll talk about that maybe in a bit. But Kamala Harris is so here we have Kamala Harris, the sitting vice president, as the Democratic nominee. She is well, I mean, she's young by sort of American electoral standards, at least for running for president. She was born in the 60s, 1964. And she has comparatively little legislative experience or even electoral experience. She was a senator for only a short time from California, and she, in fact, didn't even complete a full term when she was selected by Biden to be his running mate. It's the case that she kind of made her bones in California as first a prosecutor in San Francisco, and then was elected as Attorney General in California, a very high profile position in state government there. But she is, by many measures, a relative newcomer to all of this. And I think 4 years ago, 5 years ago, before she was selected as the vice president, she again was a junior senator from California, and I don't think anybody would have necessarily anticipated this, at least in this kind of time frame. And so, what about Harris, Dave? From your vantage point in Europe, it makes her an unusual and maybe even interesting candidate.
Well, for one thing, if she became president, she would become the first female president of the United States. Sure. In history. That part's interesting. She would become only the second Black president in U.S. history. I think these are things that both still relevant. These are things that still are going to affect her chances of becoming president, I think, realistically.
Yes, I think that's right.
And so I think everybody's really interested in seeing how this is going to play out.
Yeah, totally agree. She is she's very much a kind of fresh face too, and I think that was a welcome piece to all of this, because as we were moving into the summer, and Joe Biden and Donald Trump were the presumptive candidates, there was comparatively little enthusiasm across the board. And so the bottom fell out for Biden in June of 2024 with which may be the debate between the two, which may go down as the most consequential presidential debate of all time, because it really very much derailed his chances. Excuse me, Dave. When you think about the Trump campaign, and when it was getting its legs regarding running against Biden, what do you think? I'd just be interested in your take on how Trump viewed Biden, and how Trump now is trying to make that transition to dealing with Harris, to running against Harris.
Well, I think Trump certainly welcomed Biden as an opponent. For one thing, he has some old bones to chew with Biden.
That's for sure.
And he would have loved to have defeated him in this election, seeing that as a kind of confirmation of everything he's been saying for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
He also is an extremely unpopular president, something that any Republican candidate would certainly love to take advantage of. So I think these things all play a role.
I think that's right. I think Trump was candidly licking his chops at the prospect of being able to run against Biden again, and had difficulty making the transition to having Harris as an opponent. In fact, there will be on occasions, right, even as recently as this week, where Trump will talk about, they made this kind of this switch, this illegal switch, and so the Trump campaign was not prepared for anyone but Biden, which is interesting given Biden's age. Again, he's the oldest president. He's over 80, and his relative fragility. But nevertheless, the debate happened. Biden, after a couple of weeks, pulled out, and the race changed dramatically. And so we're going to look at the race more closely here in a second. But we have a handful of people who are tuning in for a variety of reasons. One, of course, is to glean extra credit from courses. And so the first Easter egg, ladies and gentlemen, that first Easter egg that you're all looking for is one J.D. Vance, Dogs and Cats Living Together. J.D. Vance from Ohio. Senator from Ohio is Trump's vice presidential running mate. He's actually in debate mode right now. On CBS. Maybe some of you are multitasking. And so it's J.D. Vance is the first Easter egg, J.D. Vance. So let's think a little bit about the race. And let's think a little bit about some of the so-called battleground states and the kind of electoral approach. As we've all become aware in recent years, the Electoral College really matters. Okay, so there was a time in American politics when the Electoral College was a kind of curious afterthought. I remember being in a political science class as an undergrad, where the professor talked about the Electoral College being essentially, a kind of curiosity from the 19th century, and at that point, only one presidential race had only gone the way of the Electoral College when the popular vote went another direction. And this, it's a curiosity and little more than that. Well, my friends, the Electoral College really matters in profound ways. And so, Dave, let's just think about this for a second. Not all states are created equal. And so you got to get to 270. 270 is the magic number. And so from a Democrat's perspective, where's the blue wall, Dave? So what are the states that you probably have to hold as a Democrat? Let's start there.
Look in the northern Midwest, up in Wisconsin,
yep.
For instance, Michigan,
totally agree.
Pennsylvania,
yes,
extremely important.
Extremely important, yeah. So
and basically tied at this point in the polls.
Well, that's right. That's exactly right. And so you're right. So the upper Midwest, a traditional kind of Democratic stronghold. You got to hang on to those states. The far West, in recent years, right, has become really, solidly Democratic. And so that whole West Coast, the 12 electoral votes in Washington and the 8 in Oregon, of course, the 54, the mother lode in California, those are comfortably right in the bank for Democrats.
And for blue. Yeah.
For blue. For Republicans, you really sort of work inside out, right? And so for Republicans, you eye Texas with its 40, and then you go straight north, right? So it's Oklahoma, it's Kansas, it's Nebraska, although Nebraska is interesting. It's, the rural Midwest, solidly Republican. The South, today, largely solidly Republican, maybe with a couple of exceptions. And then the Southwest is a kind of interesting battleground. A place like Arizona, for example, is very much up in the air at the moment. So as we think about this strategically, campaigning has really needs to focus on just a number of key states. And I think that's one of the things that people during the presidential race sort of lose sight of, at least sort of people who are a bit, of a novice, so don't think much about this. For example, where is all the activity in Kansas? Right? It's in the middle of a presidential race that you would not know it here.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, where's everybody? You're in Germany, but why aren't there any people in Kansas? Why don't we see Harris or Trump in Kansas?
Because those votes already belong to Trump.
That's right. Yeah. So
Harris can come as much as she likes. It's not going to change that. The Electoral College basically steers campaign strategy.
Oh, that's exactly right. It steers it completely. And there are plenty of complaints about the Electoral College. The reality is that it's here to stay for the foreseeable future. And so both Republicans and Democrats have to play the game. I just want to say a couple things. We're going to look at some battleground states in a second. I did want to point out that two states do things a little bit differently. All 48 states plus the District of Columbia, it's a winner-take-all situation. So whoever gets the most votes gets all of the Electoral College votes. Maine and Nebraska are different. They split it up with whoever gets the most votes gets two, and then whoever wins that gets the most votes within a congressional district, they get an additional Electoral College vote. Let's just think about Nebraska for a second. So Nebraska, with the 5 Electoral College votes, which means it has 2 senators and has 3 congressional representatives. We can't see this on the map, but one of the congressional districts is Omaha. And Omaha, the kind of metro area of Omaha, is solidly Democratic. And so, interestingly, in Nebraska, in past elections, Republican candidates have garnered 4 votes, and the Democratic candidates have garnered 1 vote. They've extracted that vote from Omaha. As recently as last week, Republican officials were in Nebraska urging the unicameral to change the electoral distribution system. This, I think, was clear evidence that the election, it's going to be, I think, razor thin, and every vote on the Electoral College counts, and it was worth an ask. Nebraska, for what it's for that matter, though, held on to its system. At least it'll hold on to it for at least one more election cycle. So it's going to be a close one. All right, so let's take a look, if we could, to some of the battleground states. This is polling as of this morning. We don't necessarily need to focus on the numbers so much as that these are all very close elections. They're all within the margin of error. And so what we see here could be right or could be wrong. And so as we think about the election, Dave, your strategy a minute ago, talking about holding on to the upper Midwest, Pennsylvania, Michigan, also places like Minnesota, the Democrats really need to hold those places. Wisconsin as well. The South is interesting. And so the South, really for this election, it's going to boil down to, I think, North Carolina and Georgia. As we recall, in 2020, Georgia was razor thin, and there was a recount, and it took a long time to count the votes, and there was some controversy that surrounded counting the votes, and there was some, pressuring perhaps involving counting the votes, and so I suspect that we'll see something similar again. Arizona in 2020 was also a state that was very, very close in warning recounts. And I think we're going to see something quite similar once again. Is there anything about the polling, as we are a month out from the election, Dave? Is there anything about the polling that you find, I guess, surprising, or is this what you would have expected? I'm not exactly even sure what I'm asking here, but your reaction to the polling would be what?
Well, it makes me extremely nervous. I would not have expected things to be this close. Actually, I thought when Joe Biden dropped out that many voters would be relieved and would have their main concern about voting blue disappear. And I honestly thought we'd see Harris with a bit more of a lead at this point.
Well, again, we're a month out, and I think, to your point, I think that the polling has switched pretty dramatically in terms of where we were in the summer, where I think Trump had comfortable leads in virtually most of these states. That has switched quite a bit, but to your main point, it remains very much a kind of razor thin election, which is, I think,
again, we see in certain states we see that where Harris was leading by a little bit more, uh, something of a weakening in that lead.
Yes.
Pennsylvania is virtually up for grabs at this point, and she was up by 2 or 3
Well, what
points there.
I wanted to make a couple of comments regarding that, if we could. And so, again, we'll get to questions in the chat in just a second. Pennsylvania is an interesting state in that there's a very stark rural-urban divide. And so, Pennsylvania, again, two major metro areas, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Philadelphia, in particular, a Democratic stronghold. And then much of Pennsylvania is very rural and very, very isolated. Those of you who've traveled in Pennsylvania know what I'm talking about. It's isolated. And Republicans do very well in rural Pennsylvania. What we're seeing here is Pennsylvania, again, on a kind of knife's edge, and maybe in a way that we haven't really seen before. Very much a kind of rural-urban divide. The same is true in Wisconsin. Our friends in Wisconsin on the call would be able to confirm this. Madison, Democratic stronghold. Milwaukee, Democratic stronghold largely. But much of the rest of Wisconsin, particularly small town and rural Wisconsin, very Republican. And in fact, it is the case that probably of all the states in the union, the partisan divide in Wisconsin is the most stark of any state. And so we're going to put our cards on the table here in a second. But I wanted to, Laura, are there any questions in the chat that we can get to at the moment?
Yes, there were 3 questions that have come in. First one is, how is the number of electoral votes per state determined?
Okay, so that's an excellent question. That is determined by the number of senators in a state and the number of representatives. So that number together gives you the number. So in Kansas, there are 4 congressional districts. There are 4 representatives in Congress and 2 senators. So the total in Kansas is 6. The one outlier in this is the District of Columbia. So the District of Columbia, the District of Columbia didn't have representation forever. And only through a change in the Constitution was the District of Columbia then granted electoral votes. So it has 3, even though those are all kind of imaginary in that there are no representatives or no senators from District of Columbia, but they do have 3 electoral votes. It's worth noting, too, real quickly, in terms of electoral representation, Puerto Rico, 0. American Samoa, 0. Territories are not represented, and so you don't have a vote. Another question, Laura?
Yes. How do these poll numbers compare to 2016 and 2020 at this point in the election season?
Okay, I'll take that real quickly. They compare. They're closer. They're closer than in both races. Biden,
although it should be said that in 2016 there was a more significant gap between the polling and the actual results than we have seen.
Oh yeah,
maybe in our lifetime.
Yeah, there was
a huge surprise bump for Trump.
Yeah, this is that's the surprise bump. It is 2016 is the most humbling of results for pollsters, maybe in the history of American polling. And so Trump was woefully underrepresented in poll numbers, and there's still a lot of research going into why that happened the way it did. So these poll numbers are really close, and they're, I think, a little closer than we saw in either 2 of the earlier elections. Laura, any other questions from the chat we can get
There's
to?
2 more. The first one is, do polls affect turnout and how?
Oh, Dave, you want to take that?
Sure. Well, one of the things that makes electoral campaign nervous is if the candidate is doing too well in the polls.
Yes.
Because that suggests to many people that maybe they don't have to go and place their vote for that candidate because other people will take care of it for them. So if it's raining out, well, maybe I'll just stay home and let the other people do it.
Yeah. And
that can have fatal results. The other thing is, in a very close election like this, I think the enthusiasm levels or an enthusiasm gap can be decisive, because when people really, really love a candidate, or in recent years really hate a candidate,
Yes.
they're more likely to go out when they see every vote's going to count. I've got to get out there. I've got to put my vote in.
Yeah, was it W.C. Fields who said, "I don't vote for, I vote against"? And there's this notion, right, that when Trump is on the ballot in particular, turnout is high. People will crawl across broken glass to vote against him, and people who are Trump supporters will, I mean, they'll make it happen at the ballot box, at least they have in the past couple of elections. And then, real quickly, Laura, is there one more question we can get to?
Yes, one more question. Why has there been so little discussion of meaningful electoral system reform at the federal level in the United States? Even some unlikely places like Japan have been able to accomplish substantial changes over the past few decades. I sense that probably at least electoral college is about as popular as daylight savings time.
Well, that's a good question.
That's a good question. Okay, so all right, so the electoral college piece of it is relatively straightforward in that it will take a constitutional amendment to either alter it or to unload it. And as the country is the partisan divide in the country is pretty substantial at the moment. We recognize that there's been less than 36 changes to the Constitution in the history of the country, right? So the Constitution by design is very difficult to change, and it is extremely difficult in the modern era. So I think we are loaded. We're saddled with the electoral college. I mean, I think it's just the way.
Well,
but electoral,
there is an alternative to the constitutional change, and this is a strategy that the people who are serious about trying to get rid of the electoral college are following.
Here we go.
And that's just the hope is we get enough states on board declaring that their electoral votes will go to the candidate who has the most popular votes nationwide, that the electoral college becomes meaningless at that point, and that the popular vote becomes the decisive element.
Well, that part of the trick would be available to states because the states control how they distribute their electoral votes, right? If that's completely up to the state, and that's why Nebraska has that funky system. And so, as the system that Dave is describing could, in fact, be embraced by the states, you wouldn't have to alter the Constitution in that regard. But in terms of electoral reform,
not a whole lot more likely, but
not a whole lot more. But there's but hope is in the air. In terms of overall electoral reform, I think a lot of that is just lost to the partisan divide at the moment. There's real disagreement among the two political parties about the nature of, frankly, voter access, and I think some would suggest that voter suppression is a motive for in terms of sort of trying to limit the change that's possible. It's as they say, complicated.
Quite frankly, one of the parties benefits very clearly more than the other. So the party that's benefiting has no incentive to see that changed. We have two presidents elected since 1990 by the Electoral College, who did not win the popular vote, and they were both Republicans.
Yeah. So to add to that, the last Republican to win the popular vote was George W. Bush in 2004, and so there is much to argue that the demographics of the United States are really kind of against the Republican Party. We could talk about this all night, but we want to get to a couple of other issues. And first, we want to put our cards on the table. And so, brace yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to call our shot here. And then the presidential race, yes, it is our contention that Kamala Harris will, in fact, be elected president of the United States with an overwhelming popular vote. Not that makes any difference, but it will be large. It will be very large. We think approaching 7.5 to 8 million votes. And we think she also will, in fact, have a comfortable, we'll put that in quotes, edge. Dave, you seem less convinced. A comfortable
I just want
edge.
to say I never stated that. Just for the record.
Well, you're afraid to state it. So, but if we're calling our shot, and so if we could, this will then take us to a world where Trump will not be the face of the GOP. And I think this is, I think a lot of Republicans are, there's just, they don't really know what this world looks like. There is no kind of plan B at this point. Trump is, he's a unique figure on a whole host of levels, and he's very much dominated the Republican Party for the past decade. That's extremely unusual. He is the face of the Republican Party. And so if he's not the face of the Republican Party, imagine a kind of free-for-all to get all, I don't think the Republicans have any concept. And this is, I don't think this is a secret.
He's the hole they've been digging for themselves for the last 10 years.
To some
it's
degree,
hard to
I think
see how
that's
they're
right.
going to get out of that hole.
Yeah, I would largely concur with that, particularly if he is unsuccessful yet again in November. And so we're going to think a little bit more about some other aspects of what's happening at the election. But second, the second Easter egg. And the second Easter egg is the second happy warrior from Minnesota. This is, of course, Tim Walz, who is the vice presidential pick by Kamala Harris. Tim Walz is the sitting governor of Minnesota. He is a proud graduate of West Point High School in Nebraska, graduating class of 30. He is a proud graduate of Chadron State in Western Nebraska. He is very much atypical of presidential candidates or running mates. He does not have any of the trappings that even someone like Kamala Harris or J.D. Vance, or even Trump, to that matter, have. He's a very kind of ordinary Midwestern guy, and he is Easter egg number 2, Tim Walz. So here we go. We're going to now look at the House briefly at the House. Every House seat, all 435 of them are up for re-election. Again, in the general election and even years, every seat is contested, and so that's a lot of races. Currently, as you can see here, the House is controlled by the Republicans. Frankly, it's a slim majority, right? You can see that's only 8 seats. The House Majority Leader is a guy by the name of Mike Johnson. He has had a very difficult time being House Leader because quite frankly, the Republicans don't really want to be led in the House. This is no great secret. They're really, the House is always a bit of a food fight. It's sort of the romper room of Capitol Hill. But the Republicans, there's a unique kind of collection of Republicans at the moment. And so they're not particularly interested in governing. Again, this is no great secret. So we're not going to talk about specific House races, but suffice to say that our take is that in elections in a month, that the Democrats will retake the House, and that this gentleman, Hakeem Jeffries of New York State, will be the new House Majority Leader. We think his majority will be quite thin, maybe even less than 10 seats, but they will flip enough seats to take control of the House. So,
and Steve, talking about the Republican Party going forward, if Trump loses, you might see some Republicans make an attempt to move the party back in a more moderate direction. Some Republicans seeing that as a future direction for the party, which would make the possibility of working across the aisle and arriving at compromises more likely than it is now.
I think that is, and I think that is one scenario. I think that's one scenario. I think that is, I think a less likely scenario than doubling down on MAGA, but I think that's in play. I definitely think that's in play. So the third Easter egg, this is perhaps the most powerful person in Washington. This is, again, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts. John Roberts has been a Chief Justice for a couple of decades now. The Roberts Court in recent years has been a very interesting and activist court, and really, I think, reshaped the political landscape and, well, a number of other things. And I think you can argue, this is not really what we're talking about tonight, but I think you can argue that John Roberts is the most significant Chief Justice since Earl Warren, the 1950s, maybe even more significant. And I think he's a very pivotal figure. And it doesn't matter who's president, John Roberts is going to be Chief Justice. And so John Roberts is Easter egg number 3, those of you keeping track of this. And so let's move now to the Senate. And the Senate is, well, the Senate's super interesting, in part because of the design of the Senate. You have 6-year terms because of relatively small numbers. It's also the case, right, that in the Senate, every senator is a senator. So whether you're from Wyoming or from Texas, whether you're from New York or Montana. And so it makes a difference in terms of the strategy involved for political parties as well. I want to mention the reality here for the Democrats, who in fact control the Senate, sort of. So currently, there are 51 people who caucus with Democrats. You can see this in front of you, right? So you have 47 Democrats and you have 4 independents. And those independents are, and I'm going to do this without looking, Bernie Sanders from Vermont, Angus King from Maine, also then Joe Manchin from West Virginia, and one Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona. Our colleagues in Arizona are, I don't know what they're doing at the moment. But Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin were both Democrats until fairly recently, when they both dropped out of the party. They continue to caucus, sort of, with the Democrats, which means that they meet with Democrats. They will, on occasion, vote with Democrats. They are considered sort of Democrats, maybe light, maybe.
Dinos.
Okay, Dinos. I believe Democrats in name only, some would suggest. But we can see here that the number is actually, I mean, the number of Democrats is actually 47. And so in the election coming up, there are a number of really key seats. And we want to look at some of these races and talk about a couple of these states, because it really does make a difference regarding the Senate. And I think beyond that, will make a difference in terms of a president. Because as we recognize, the oversight of the president falls mainly on the shoulders of the U.S. Senate. And so, for example, when a president wants to appoint a person to the cabinet, it has to go through the Senate. The Senate has to approve. When a president appoints a person to the Supreme Court, it has to go through the Senate, and so on. So here we go.
And that's been extremely important in the last few years. You're going to have, and so that's right. And so I almost guarantee Dave a heart attack here coming up soon. And so we're going to look now at a couple of, we're going to look at 7 races real quickly in the Senate. We're going to talk about also what's going on in the states, because it's interesting. The states are unique. States are changing, and there's a kind of electoral and political thing that we need to be aware of as students of politics and as citizens. So West Virginia, we don't think about West Virginia very much, but historically, it has been a solidly Republican state. This is what makes Joe Manchin, who was, I mentioned him a second ago, so interesting. Joe Manchin, who served a couple of terms as senator from West Virginia, again, was a Democrat until very recently, when he became an independent. He's not running. He's not running in 2024. Instead, you've got a race between the sitting governor, Jim Justice, and then I think the mayor of Wheeling, West Virginia, a guy named Glenn Elliott. Jim Justice on the left is going to win the race. And what I think the reality is that this will be a flip. So this is, presently a kind of a seat of, would-be Democrat or sort of Democrat. It's going to definitely be a Republican. And I think that there will not be another Democratic senator from West Virginia for a long time. So this is a kind of permanent flip with Jim Justice. In Montana, now we should think about Montana more often, right? Don't you think? And so Montana is a small state in terms of population, but it is growing. It's growing pretty rapidly. In fact, it's growing so rapidly that it added an electoral college vote. Recently. And so it now,
It's not sitting at the bottom anymore. It added an electoral college vote. But what's interesting about Montana is that it is growing decidedly more conservative. So people moving to Montana are moving there for a reason, and many of them view government with great suspicion. So you have a race here between a three-term senator, a guy by the name of John Tester on the left, and the newcomer, former Navy SEAL Tim Sheehy. By the way, it seems like everybody's a former Navy SEAL, right? I mean, you wonder if anybody's still in the SEALs anymore, but he's a former Navy SEAL, Tim Sheehy. Sheehy is Republican, very conservative, closely aligned with Donald Trump, and is winning. Is winning. He's ahead. And I think it's clear that Tester has always been an unusual candidate because Montana is a kind of right-leaning conservative state, and he was a Democrat. Now, to be clear, Tester is a very conservative Democrat, an immigration hawk, and that he's almost considered a kind of liberal in Montana. But I think other Democrats view him as very, very conservative. The other thing but an interesting senator to have in a conservative state, right? You have a Democrat. The other thing about Montana is that every senator is kind of the same, yet where they're from is very different. So to run a campaign in Montana is very, very inexpensive. And so Democrats have been throwing loads of resources to try to bolster John Tester because you got to keep him afloat. And you can do that in a way that it's much more difficult in other states with larger media markets. So I'm interested in Dave's take here. So Arizona is an interesting state. Dave, what your sense of how border issues in particular play in Arizona?
Well, I think they're every bit as large as they are in the rest of the country, and certainly more so, actually, being an actual border state.
Yeah, they do make a difference. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. That being said, so in Arizona, Trump is ahead. It's a state that Trump lost in 2020, but he's ahead in 2024. It looks like he may in fact pull it out. Interestingly, the race right now for senator involves then Ruben Gallego against Kari Lake, and Gallego is comfortably ahead. And so there's no coattails here for Trump in Arizona, and I think that is surprising to some people. You could imagine
surprising to Kari Lake.
It is surprising to Kari Lake, who will be really 0 for 2. So she ran a couple of years ago in a high-profile race and lost. It looks as though she's slated to lose again. But I think it demonstrates the absence of coattails for Trump, and this I think is a worrying sign for Republicans. Again, coattails is the notion that if the presidential candidate is popular, then down ticket races will sort of fall in line, in terms of the same party. Trump doesn't have many coattails, and he has no coattails in Arizona, which I think for many people is quite surprising. But it looks like the Democrats will retain control of that seat. Again, Sinema was a Democrat, then wasn't a Democrat, but Gallego looks like he's ahead. Now, historically, Ohio has been a bellwether state. This was getting to your point earlier, and it's interesting when you talked about the states that Democrats needed to hold on to, that you skipped over Ohio, and that's because the reality is that Ohio is no longer a bellwether state, or that's to say that Ohio is decidedly Republican. Yeah. This race has Sherrod Brown against Brian Moreno, as you can see here. Moreno had a very big gaffe a couple of weeks ago involving abortion, where he talked about how why is it that women over 50 are interested in abortion issues, and that immediately that didn't do great things to his campaign, and he was ahead, and now he's slightly behind. Who knows how those exactly will play out? But I just want to mention Sherrod Brown is a person has gotten buzz in previous election cycles as a potential VP candidate. He is a remarkable political figure in that he's managed to kind of stay afloat as a Democrat in a state that is decidedly Republican. And it looks like he might pull that trick off once again. We've got, of course, a campus in Wisconsin, and we've got, I think, people on the Zoom call from Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is an interesting place, as I suggested a second ago. You talk about partisan divide. Republicans and Democrats are almost in open warfare in Wisconsin. The governor of Wisconsin, a guy by the name of Tony Evers, is a Democrat who's, the Republican, there's a large Republican majority in the state house, and they go at it all the time. Eric Hovedy, and I may be mispronouncing, but Hovedy is a kind of golden name in Wisconsin. It comes from a very powerful family, running against the incumbent Tammy Baldwin. Tammy Baldwin is a fascinating figure. She is she's openly gay. She was the first openly gay senator in the Senate. She's running for a third term. In fact, she's always been a kind of trailblazing figure, but she is a bit of an anomaly in Wisconsin. And again, our friends in Wisconsin, feel free to add a question or a thought in the chat. Wisconsin is a state that a century ago was the most liberal in the United States. Robert LaFollette was the governor, right, and then senator from Wisconsin. I mean, Wisconsin was a kind of progressive kind of icon. And today it's a very conservative state, or becoming a very conservative state. And so Baldwin exists as a kind of an anomaly, but she is ahead, and looks like the Democrats will hold on to that state. Okay, a couple more. So I'm going to tee this one up for you, Dave. And so there's Ted Cruz on the left. He's the incumbent from Texas, senator running for a third term. Colin Allred, the Democrat, who's a sitting representative right now. Colin Allred, who was, for some of you, may recognize him. He was an NFL player. He was in the NFL for 5 years, played linebacker for the Tennessee Titans. He is, he's barely ahead. He's actually ahead of Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz always has challenges. What was it that Al Franken said about Ted Cruz, Dave?
He was one of the people that got along best with Ted Cruz while he was in the Senate, and he didn't like him.
No, he didn't like him. Yeah, he was described as the person at work who puts fish in the microwave. But so Ted Cruz, he does seem to have challenges, but he always gets elected or reelected. And he's in the fight of his life at the moment. And I just wanted to say something about Colin Allred in Texas. Texas is a fast-growing state. It increased its electoral count dramatically this past reapportionment, and it is considered a kind of Republican stronghold. But let me just say this. If Colin Allred, I have this in my notes here, if Colin Allred wins the election, look out. This guy is on the rocket ship to fame as a Democrat. Imagine a Black Democratic senator coming out of Texas. That would be an extraordinary achievement. And so at the moment,
probably only a footballer could
well, play with the cards, right, at your dealt or whatever. What is it? The dance with the lady who brung you, or whatever the heck, some sort of Texasism. But it didn't hurt. It doesn't hurt for him to have that in his background. The last race I wanted to mention here is a very peculiar one. And that is just to the north of where I'm at right now, Nebraska. Deb Fischer, Republican, running for a third term against Dan Osborne. Not that Osborne, by the way. Some people on the call will say, oh, Osborne, Nebraska. Well, yeah, no. So that Osborne, Tom Osborne, has an E behind it. So the famous football coach. But Dan Osborne is a steam fitter, is a union guy. Hardworking union guy, union organizer, and never, is my understanding, never run for elective office before. He's also running as an independent, and he has eschewed any kind of Democratic help. So he is not affiliated with the Democrats. He's not taking Democratic money either from the state or national party. He's kind of doing it on his own. Deb Fischer is a kind of backbencher. She doesn't have much of a profile in Washington. A dutiful politician, but not a particularly effective campaigner. That point I tried to make a second ago about that all senators are the same. So Nebraska is a place where where a long shot like this can happen. And so relatively small population, where a little money can make a big difference. And as of this week, Osborne has edged ahead in the polls. This would be this would be a lightning strike on akin to Aldred winning in Texas. And so I'm not certain how this is going to play out. But you talk about a flip. This would be a flip of all times if a non-Republican, the non-Republican could win the Senate in Nebraska of all places. And I just want to say something real quick. And again, this could be a strategy thing for lots of would-be candidates in states where a Democratic Party is barely functioning. So, for example, Kansas, the Democratic State Party doesn't, I mean, it barely functions. And certainly in other plain states, whether it's Oklahoma or the Dakotas, there's barely Democratic Party. But if you could align yourself as a kind of independent, it's an interesting strategy, and I suspect that we'll see more people follow it. Okay, so
being a union guy is going to help because he has that organization behind him, that's a massive thing.
Yes, absolutely. No, that's, and there still is a fair number of union workers in Nebraska, particularly in the Omaha area. So, I mean, he's got a shot. So I promised Dave a heart attack, and here I'm going to deliver it. And so the likely outcome, this is our call, and our call is that in fact the Senate will flip to Republican hands. It won't take much, right? It won't take many wins for the Republicans to control the Senate. But I wanted to mention, you can see it on the screen, 2026 is just 2 years away, and a number of very vulnerable Republicans will be running in 2026. And it seems possible, if not even likely, the Democrats could retake it in 2026. But the time for the fourth Easter egg, and here comes, so somebody get Dave some nitroglycerin. The fourth Easter egg is Mitch McConnell. So Mitch McConnell is a senator from Kentucky. Mitch McConnell is the Republican minority leader. So he is the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. And for several years, he was the majority leader in the Senate. And evil genius is a name or as a phrase that's associated with Mitch McConnell, but he was very, very successful in what he did. And I think he's the most consequential majority leader, certainly of recent history. I think you can make an argument for all time, but he has declared that he's had a lot of health issues. He's declared that even if Republicans win in November and win the Senate, that he will in fact step down from leadership. He will not be the Republican leader. Of course, he's said things before, but at this point, it doesn't look like he'll be the Republican leader. But the fourth Easter egg is Mitch McConnell. We're going to get to the question.
And this guy had more to do with the current makeup of the Supreme Court than any other person in Washington.
That's exactly right, and we could go on for hours about that. Again, he was. He knew how to kind of play the game, as they say. And so a couple of the things here, as our time winds down, as we get to near the top of the hour, Supreme Court had an enormous decision this summer involving a case, as you can see it, involving Donald Trump. And in it, the Supreme Court outlined that, in fact, a president has, almost unlimited immunity with core office activities, and substantial limited immunity in more peripheral activities. Now, the devil's in the details, and the details aren't particularly clear in the decision. But what the Supreme Court seems to be saying is that an activist president could have a lot of cover legally. And so as we think about the election coming up, the consequences are, I think, really interesting and potentially quite profound. And I think, well, candidly, I think either of the candidates, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, could use the Supreme Court decision and do a lot of things. We'll just put it that way. And a lot of things, and with almost no consequence. I think we're still trying to sort out what this decision means. Again, it was only handed down a few months ago, but it's extraordinarily consequential. And on this goes.
Especially retroactively. I mean, there are a number of things that Trump did while in office that are at least potentially criminal. He's been charged with some of these things, and this, well, it's already happening. It's taking the teeth out of the prosecution.
That's right. And so we haven't mentioned, and this is intentional. Trump has several outstanding trials yet to happen. Two of them federal trials, one of them a state trial. This few months ago, he was convicted in a federal trial. That sentencing will take place then a few days after the election. He's got a lot on his plate legally, but again, some of you are aware of this, but as president, a president has basically unlimited pardon power on the federal level. And so it's quite conceivable that a President Trump could pardon himself and from all the federal cases. He can't, or a president would not be able to extricate oneself from a state case. And there is a state case against him in Georgia. But we're near the top of the hour and we want to make sure that we have time. And I'm aware that we still have one Easter egg yet too. And so Laura, can we get a couple more questions from the chat?
Yes. One of the questions came in of, do you think one political party could win both the House and the Senate?
I'm going to give this one to Dave. So Dave, you look into your crystal ball. So what do you think in 2024? I mean, it's clearly this has happened before, but what do you think in 2024? What are the odds of one political party capturing all of Capitol Hill, do you think?
I think the problem is going to be with the Senate. I think it's potentially possible. I think if a couple of these dark horse candidates actually can win their elections, we get Ted Cruz out of there, things like that.
I would respond.
I don't think it's likely, but
I don't.
Possible, sure.
I don't think it's likely either, but I think it's more likely that Republicans win both the House and the Senate than Democrats win both the House and the Senate. I think it's the most likely scenario that the Congress is split. Laura, a couple of other questions. We have anything else?
You had another statement that said, when you were talking about Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson as our two senators in Wisconsin just show how divided the state is.
Holy smokes! Truer words have never been spoken. Yeah, Ron Johnson is a Republican, an unusual figure even by conservative Republican standards. And so, yeah, I don't have anything more to add to that. That is absolutely right. Anything else from the chat?
Yes, another one came in that said, any thoughts or predictions on the Senate race in Missouri, Hawley versus Kuntz?
I have a thought. I think Josh Hawley will prevail. Missouri is a Republican stronghold. It's interesting. Claire McCaskill was a Democrat who did, in fact, win a Senate seat, maybe not too long ago, but her time in the Senate was quite short. And her election was a kind of an anomaly because her opponent actually imploded. I think that Hawley, despite the fact that the race is close, and I think Hawley is an imperfect candidate by almost any measure, I think that Hawley will prevail in Missouri. Anything else from the chat?
The only other question that came in was, what is the definition of bellwether?
Oh, bellwether. So Dave, you take bellwether and then we'll get to the last Easter egg.
Well, bellwether talks about something that is an indicator of a tendency on a regional level. It just gives us an indication of where things are going.
Yeah. Yeah, and so historically, Ohio was a bellwether, and so if a Republican candidate won Ohio, then probably was going to prevail in the general election across the country, in terms of electoral college. So that's what a bellwether is. And so with that, then so I know, my goodness, these poor students are just waiting with bated breath. And so this is, ladies and gentlemen, the last Easter egg. And Dave and I will try not to weep, but it's a bumper sticker from 1968. In 1968, Richard Milhouse Nixon chose Spiro Agnew as his running mate. The Nixon-Agnew ticket won in 68, also won again in 72. So the
first one was a close one. And the second one was not.
No, the second one was not a close one, but now the second one was the one that got Nixon. I mean, it ended his career. So I think for a number of reasons, Dave and I find Richard Nixon and actually Spiro Agnew incredibly fascinating, maybe the most fascinating of all American presidents. And so the fifth and final Easter egg is Nixon Agnew. And so with that, everybody, we really appreciate your time this evening. Laura, we really appreciate your help with all of this. Thanks again to all of you for your questions, the great questions in the chat. We will do this one more time, unbelievably. We were scheduled to do this a couple of weeks after the election. So it looks as though on the 19th of November, Dave and I will join you again with Election 2024, What We Learned. And I suspect, well, here's what I suspect, that the election will be decided by November 19th, right? I mean, it can't go on and on, right? They'll have those counts. Oh, my God. So with that, good night, good morning, good luck. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you in late November. Thanks again, everybody. And thank you, Laura.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dave.